The silence in the graduation hall was deafening as I stood at the entrance, scanning row after row of filled seats, searching desperately for the two faces that should have been there. My heart hammered against my ribcage as the reality hit me like a freight train. They hadn't come. After 4 years of sleepless nights, countless study sessions, working 3 part-time jobs to pay my way through college, my own parents couldn't even be bothered to show up to watch me graduate summa cum laude from Stanford University. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The ceremony had already begun, and I could hear Dean Martinez calling out names in alphabetical order. Soon, very soon, they would call Isabella Chen, and I would have to walk across that stage knowing that the 2 empty seats in the family section weren't saved for latecomers. They were empty because my parents had chosen not to fill them. Let me take you back to the beginning of this nightmare, because what happened that day would change everything I thought I knew about my family, about success, and about the price of assumptions. My name is Isabella Chen, and I'm 22 years old. For as long as I can remember, I've been the disappointment of the Chen family. Not because I was a troublemaker or a failure, but because I chose a different path than the one my parents had carved out in stone before I could even walk. You see, my parents, David and Margaret Chen, built their empire from nothing. They immigrated from Taiwan with 2 suitcases and a dream, and through sheer determination and sacrifice, they created Chen Industries, a manufacturing company that now employs over 3,000 people across the West Coast. By the time I was born, we lived in a mansion in Atherton, drove luxury cars, and vacationed in places most people only see in magazines. But success came with expectations. Heavy, suffocating expectations that felt like chains around my ankles from the moment I could understand what they were saying. Isabella will take over the company, my father would tell his business associates at dinner parties, his hand heavy on my shoulder as I squirmed in my uncomfortable dress. She's going to study business at Stanford, just like I did, and then she'll come work for us. Keep it in the family, you know? The problem was, I had zero interest in manufacturing widgets or managing supply chains. While my parents saw profit margins and market expansion, I saw environmental waste and worker exploitation. While they saw legacy and tradition, I saw a prison with golden bars. My passion lay elsewhere entirely. I wanted to be a social worker, to help families in crisis, to work with children who had been abandoned or abused. I wanted to make a difference in individual lives, not corporate bottom lines. But every time I tried to bring this up, my parents would shut me down with the same dismissive wave and the same tired lecture about responsibility and family duty. Social work? My mother had scoffed when I was 16 and brave enough to voice my dreams. Isabella, don't be ridiculous. You can't help anyone if you're poor yourself. You'll understand when you're older. Business is in your blood. So I played along. I pretended to be interested in their conversations about quarterly reports and expansion plans. I smiled and nodded when they dragged me to corporate functions where I was paraded around like a prize pony. I even applied to Stanford's business program, just as they expected. But here's what they didn't know. I had also applied to their social work program. And when I got accepted to both, I made the most terrifying and liberating decision of my life. I chose social work. The explosion when I told them was nuclear. My father's face turned purple with rage, and my mother actually started crying, not from sadness, but from what she called the embarrassment of it all. "Do you have any idea what you're throwing away?" my father had shouted, pacing back and forth in his study like a caged animal. "Everything we've built, everything we've worked for, and you want to waste it helping other people's problems? What about your own family's legacy?" "I want to help people, Dad," I had said quietly, my voice barely audible over his rage. "I want to make a real difference in the world." "Make a difference?" My mother's voice was shrill with disbelief. "Isabella, you can make a difference by running a successful company, by providing jobs, by contributing to the economy, not by wasting your intelligence on people who won't appreciate it." That's when they delivered the ultimatum that would define the next 4 years of my life. "Fine," my father had said, his voice cold as winter. "If you want to throw your life away, do it on your own dime. Don't expect us to pay for your mistake." And just like that, I was cut off. No more allowance, no more credit cards, no more safety net. They didn't kick me out of the house, but they made it clear that if I chose social work over business, I was choosing to be financially independent. Most parents would have assumed their 18-year-old daughter would cave under that pressure. They probably expected me to come crawling back within a month, begging for forgiveness and promising to switch majors. Instead, I got a job. Then I got 2 more jobs. I worked at a campus coffee shop from 5 in the morning until my first class. I tutored struggling students in the evenings. I worked weekends at a local nonprofit, filing paperwork and answering phones. Every penny I earned went toward tuition, books, and the tiny studio apartment I rented near campus. It was exhausting. There were nights when I survived on ramen noodles and determination, when I fell asleep over my textbooks because I was working too many hours to maintain a normal sleep schedule. There were moments when I questioned everything, when the weight of my parents' disappointment felt heavier than my dreams. But I also discovered something incredible about myself during those 4 years. I was stronger than I had ever imagined. Every challenge that would have broken the privileged girl I used to be only made me more determined. Every night I went to bed bone-tired but proud of what I had accomplished with my own 2 hands. And academically, I flourished. Without the pressure of living up to my parents' expectations in a field I hated, I threw myself into my studies with genuine passion. My professors noticed. My grades reflected it. By my junior year, I was at the top of my class, conducting research that was getting attention from major universities across the country. My senior thesis on trauma-informed care for at-risk youth was selected for publication in the Journal of Social Work Research. My advisor, Professor Williams, told me it was some of the most innovative work she'd seen in 20 years of teaching. But through it all, the silence from home was deafening. I sent my parents updates about my achievements, hoping that maybe, just maybe, they would see that I was succeeding on the path I had chosen. I sent them copies of my published papers, letters of recommendation from professors, news about the prestigious internships I was earning. The responses, when they came at all, were polite but cold. "That's nice, dear," my mother would text back. "Your father and I are very busy with the company expansion." No pride, no congratulations, no acknowledgement that their daughter was excelling in ways they had never imagined. The worst part was family gatherings. I still came home for holidays, mostly because I missed my younger brother Marcus, who was only 16 and still firmly under our parents' thumb. During those visits, I became invisible. My parents would talk enthusiastically about Marcus's academic achievements, his acceptance to prestigious summer programs, his bright future in business. When relatives asked about me, my parents would give vague, dismissive answers. "Oh, Isabella is still in school," they would say, as if my impending graduation from one of the most competitive programs in the country was some kind of extended adolescence. The breaking point came 6 months before graduation, during Thanksgiving dinner. My Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, had asked about my plans after college. "Isabella is graduating summa cum laude," I had said quietly, trying to inject some pride into the conversation about my own life. My father barely looked up from his plate. "She's graduating with a social work degree," he said, his tone making it sound like I was graduating with a degree in basket weaving. "We've told her she can come work for the company when she gets tired of playing with her little hobby." The dismissal in his voice, the complete lack of respect for everything I had worked so hard to achieve, hit me like a physical blow. I excused myself from the table and spent the rest of the evening in my old bedroom, staring at the ceiling and wondering if my parents would ever see me as anything more than a disappointment. That's when I made a decision that seemed small at the time, but would end up changing everything. I decided not to send them a graduation invitation. It wasn't out of spite, or at least I didn't think it was at the time. I told myself it was practical. Why go through the motions of inviting people who had made it crystal clear that they didn't support what I was doing? Why subject myself to the humiliation of having them sit in the audience, checking their phones and counting the minutes until they could leave? So I didn't mention the ceremony when I called home. I didn't ask if they wanted tickets. I told myself that graduation was for me, to celebrate what I had accomplished, and that I didn't need their validation to make it meaningful. But as I stood there in the hallway outside the graduation venue, wearing my cap and gown and watching families take pictures with their graduates, I realized I had made a terrible mistake. Because no matter how independent I thought I was, no matter how much I told myself I didn't need their approval, there was still a part of me that desperately wanted my parents to be proud of what I had achieved. Looking around at this sea of happy families, I felt more alone than I had ever felt in my life. My friends were there, of course, and Professor Williams had promised to cheer extra loud when my name was called. But there's something about major life milestones that makes you want the people who raised you to witness them, even if the relationship is complicated. I was about to find a seat in the back, resigned to celebrating this achievement solo, when I felt a tap on my shoulder. "Excuse me, are you Isabella Chen?" I turned around to find a woman in her 50s, well-dressed, but with kind eyes and a warm smile. She didn't look familiar, but something about her presence was oddly comforting. "Yes, that's me," I said, wondering if she was connected to the university somehow. "My name is Sarah Martinez," she said, extending her hand. "I'm the director of Pacific Coast Children's Services. I've been hoping to meet you." Pacific Coast Children's Services. I knew the name. They were one of the most respected child welfare organizations on the West Coast, known for their innovative approaches to foster care and family reunification. But I had no idea why their director would know who I was. "I'm sorry," I said, shaking her hand but still confused. "I think there might be some mistake. We've never met." Sarah smiled wider. "No mistake. Professor Williams sent me your thesis 6 months ago. Your research on trauma-informed care has been making waves in our field. We've actually been implementing some of your recommendations in our programs, and the results have been remarkable." I felt my face flush with surprise and pride. Really? Really? In fact, that's why I'm here. We've been trying to reach you about a position, but the contact information we had seemed to be outdated. When Professor Williams mentioned you were graduating today, I decided to come congratulate you in person and hopefully convince you to consider working with us. My heart started racing. Pacific Coast Children's Services was exactly the kind of organization I had dreamed of working for. They were doing cutting-edge work in exactly the areas I was most passionate about. "I would be incredibly interested," I said, trying not to sound as desperate as I felt. "But I have to warn you, I don't have any real experience yet. I've only done internships and volunteer work." Sarah laughed. "Isabella, you've already contributed more to our field through your research than some people do in entire careers. We're not looking for experience, we're looking for innovation, passion, and intelligence. From what I've seen of your work, you have all three in abundance." As we talked, Sarah explained that they had been searching for someone to head up their new trauma research division. It was a position that would involve direct client work, program development, and ongoing research. It was exactly what I had hoped to do someday, but I had expected it would take years of experience to reach that level. "The salary is $68,000 to start," Sarah said, "with full benefits and opportunities for advancement. We're also prepared to offer you a signing bonus to help with student loans or relocation expenses." I nearly choked. $68,000. I had been prepared to take a position making half that much, grateful for any opportunity to start building experience in my field. This was more than I had dared to hope for. "When would you need an answer?" I asked, still reeling from the unexpected turn my graduation day had taken. "Well," Sarah said with a grin, "how about we start with you walking across that stage and getting your diploma? Then we can talk details." As if on cue, the announcement came over the loudspeaker that graduates should take their seats, as the ceremony was about to begin. "I should probably find somewhere to sit," I said, looking around at the packed auditorium. "Actually," Sarah said, "I reserved seats for my family, but my daughter couldn't make it from New York at the last minute. Would you like me to save them for anyone?" I felt that familiar pang of loneliness as I shook my head. "No, it's just me today." Sarah's expression softened with understanding. "Well then, you'll sit with us. Consider it your first day as part of the Pacific Coast family." As I took my place in the graduate section, I looked up at the audience and saw Sarah waving at me from the family section, flanked by what I assumed were her husband and son. For a moment, the absence of my own family stung a little less. The ceremony was beautiful. When they called my name, I walked across that stage with my head high, knowing that I had earned every step. Professor Williams cheered wildly, as promised, and I could see Sarah's family clapping enthusiastically from their seats. As I accepted my diploma, summa cum laude honors clearly announced to the audience, I felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval. I had done this. Against all odds, despite being cut off financially, despite the disappointment and lack of support from the people who should have been my biggest cheerleaders, I had not only survived, but thrived. After the ceremony, as I was taking pictures with my friends and professors, my phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, my heart leaped, thinking maybe my parents had seen the ceremony online or heard about it somehow and were reaching out to congratulate me. Instead, it was my brother Marcus. "Mom and Dad are freaking out," the text read. "Someone from Dad's company was at a Stanford event today and saw your name on the summa cum laude list. They had no idea you were graduating, let alone with highest honors. Mom is crying and Dad locked himself in his office. What happened?" My hands shook as I read the message. They hadn't known. Somehow, in all my calculations about whether to invite them, I had assumed they at least knew when graduation was. I had thought they were choosing not to come, not that they were completely unaware it was happening. Before I could figure out how to respond to Marcus, my phone started ringing. My mother's name appeared on the screen. I stared at it for 3 rings before finally answering. "Isabella?" My mother's voice was strange, shaky in a way I had never heard before. "Sweetheart, Mrs. Wong from your father's board of directors just called. She said she saw your name announced at Stanford graduation today. She said you graduated summa cum laude." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. "Is that true?" she asked quietly. "Yes," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you invite us?" And there it was, the question I had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. How do you explain to your parents that their own behavior had made you feel so unsupported, so invisible, that you assumed they wouldn't want to celebrate your achievements? "I didn't think you'd want to come," I said honestly. "You made it pretty clear that you didn't support what I was doing." The sound my mother made was somewhere between a sob and a gasp. "Isabella, no. Oh, sweetheart, no. We might not have understood your choice, but we would never, ever miss your graduation. You're our daughter. We're so proud of you." But even as she said the words, I could hear the shock in her voice. Proud of me? This was the first time I had heard those words from either of my parents in 4 years. "Your father wants to talk to you," she continued. "We're coming to see you. Where are you?" "Mom, the ceremony is over. I'm already—" "We're coming anyway. We need to see you. We need to talk." After I hung up, I stood there in my cap and gown, surrounded by celebrating families, trying to process what had just happened. Sarah approached me with a concerned expression. "Everything okay?" she asked. I shook my head, not trusting myself to speak without crying. "Family drama?" she asked gently. I nodded. "Want to talk about it?" And suddenly I found myself telling this woman I had just met the entire story. About my parents' expectations, about being cut off, about working my way through school alone, about the 4 years of disappointment and silence, about how I had assumed they wouldn't want to come to graduation, and how I had just discovered they didn't even know it was happening. Sarah listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or making soft sounds of understanding. "You know," she said when I finished, "in my line of work, I see a lot of families struggling to communicate. Often, both sides think they know what the other is thinking, and both sides are wrong. It sounds like your parents made some assumptions about your choices, and you made some assumptions about their feelings." "But they cut me off," I protested. "They made it clear that they didn't support me." "They cut off financial support," Sarah corrected gently. "That's not the same thing as cutting off love, even though it probably felt like it at the time. Sometimes parents make terrible decisions because they think it's what's best for their children in the long run." I wanted to argue, but something in her tone made me pause. Sarah had spent her entire career working with families in crisis. If anyone understood the complicated dynamics between parents and children, it was her. "What do I do now?" I asked. "You listen," she said simply. You give them a chance to explain, just like you'd want them to give you a chance to explain, and then you decide what kind of relationship you want to have going forward. An hour later, I was sitting in a coffee shop near campus, still in my graduation dress, when my parents walked in. I almost didn't recognize them at first. My father, who I had never seen looking anything less than perfectly composed, looked haggard and older than his 55 years. My mother's eyes were red from crying, and she was clutching a tissue in her hand. They spotted me immediately and hurried over to my table. For a moment, we all just stared at each other, not knowing where to begin. Finally, my father broke the silence. "Isabella," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "we are so sorry." And then, to my complete shock, my father, the man who had built an empire through strength and determination, who had never shown vulnerability in front of anyone, started to cry. "We failed you," he continued, tears streaming down his face. "We were so focused on what we thought was best for your future that we forgot to support you in the present. We thought if we made things difficult enough, you'd change your mind and come back to business. We never imagined you'd succeed so brilliantly on your own." My mother reached across the table and took my hands in hers. "Sweetheart, we know we hurt you. We know we missed 4 years of your incredible achievements because we were too stubborn and too scared to admit we might be wrong." "Scared?" I asked, confused. My father wiped his eyes with his sleeve, something I had never seen him do in my entire life. Scared that we had raised a daughter who was stronger and more principled than we were. Scared that you were right to choose helping others over making money. Scared that everything we had worked for might not be as important as we thought it was. My mother nodded. "When Mrs. Wong told us about your graduation, about your honors, we realized we didn't even know what you had been studying all these years. We just knew it wasn't business, and that was all we cared about. We never asked about your classes, your research, your dreams." "We Googled you," my father admitted, looking embarrassed. "Did you know your thesis has been cited in academic papers across the country? Did you know there are articles about your research in professional journals? Our daughter is already making a name for herself in her field, and we had no idea." I felt tears starting to form in my own eyes. "I sent you copies of everything. I sent you my papers, my awards, updates about my internships." "We know," my mother said, her voice breaking. "We kept them all, every single thing you sent us. But we told ourselves they were just participation trophies, things that didn't matter in the real world. We couldn't admit that you were excelling in something we didn't understand or value." My father leaned forward. "Isabella, can you forgive us? Can you give us a chance to be the parents you deserved all along?" I looked at these two people who had shaped my entire life, who had pushed me to be independent and strong even when they didn't mean to, who were now sitting across from me more vulnerable than I had ever seen them. "I got a job offer today," I said quietly. They both looked up with interest. "Pacific Coast Children's Services wants me to head up their new trauma research division. The director came to graduation specifically to meet me." My parents exchanged glances. "How much does it pay?" my father asked, then immediately looked ashamed of himself. "I'm sorry, that's not the right question." "It's okay," I said with a small smile. $68,000 to start, plus benefits and signing bonus." My mother's eyes widened. "Isabella, that's wonderful. That's more than most business graduates make in their first job." "And the work?" my father asked. "Will you be happy?" It was such a simple question, but it was the first time either of my parents had ever asked it. "I think I will," I said. "It's everything I dreamed of doing. Research, direct client work, program development. I'll be helping children and families in crisis, using everything I learned in school to make a real difference in people's lives." My father nodded slowly. "Then we're proud of you. We should have been proud of you all along." The conversation continued for hours. We talked about the last 4 years, about the misunderstandings and hurt feelings on both sides. My parents told me about how they had struggled with my choice, how they had convinced themselves that tough love was the answer, how they had been too proud to admit they might be wrong. I told them about the lonely nights, about working multiple jobs, about the achievements I had wanted to share with them but felt like I couldn't. I told them about the pain of thinking they didn't care about my success, about feeling invisible at family gatherings. As the coffee shop began to close around us, my mother asked the question I had been dreading. What happens now? How do we move forward from here? I thought about Sarah's advice, about giving them a chance, just like I would want them to give me a chance. I don't know, I said honestly. I'm still hurt. I'm still angry about some things. But I'm also tired of being estranged from my family. I want to try to build something better than what we had. My father reached across the table and took my other hand, so that both my parents were holding on to me. We want that too, he said, more than anything. As we prepared to leave, my mother hesitated. Isabella, she said, would it be okay if we took some pictures? I know it's too late for graduation photos, but maybe we could take some anyway? I want to remember this day as the day we got our daughter back. So there, in front of a closed coffee shop at 10 o'clock at night, my parents took dozens of pictures of me in my graduation dress. Me alone, me with each of them, all three of us together. My mother cried through most of them, but they were happy tears this time. We're going to frame these, she said, looking through the photos on her phone. We're going to put them in the house, and we're going to tell everyone about our daughter, the researcher, our daughter who graduated summa cum laude, our daughter who got a job offer on graduation day because she's brilliant at what she does. My father cleared his throat. Speaking of the house, your room is exactly the way you left it, in case you ever want to visit while you're transitioning to your new job, or just because you want to come home. Home. It was a word that had felt complicated for so long, but suddenly it felt possible again. 3 months later, I was settled into my new position at Pacific Coast Children's Services, loving every challenging, rewarding day of it. My research was already being implemented in programs across the state, and I was building relationships with clients and colleagues that felt meaningful and impactful. My relationship with my parents was still a work in progress, but it was progressing. They asked questions about my work now, real questions that showed they were trying to understand what I did and why it mattered. They bragged about me to their friends and business associates, making up for 4 years of dismissive comments with enthusiastic stories about my achievements. Most importantly, they had learned to see me as I was, not as they had expected me to be. And I had learned that sometimes the people we love most make terrible mistakes, not because they don't care about us, but because they care so much that they lose sight of what actually helps versus what they think should help. The empty seats at graduation had taught us all something valuable. My parents learned that their daughter was stronger and more capable than they had ever imagined, and that their love and support didn't have to be conditional on me following their predetermined path. I learned that sometimes the absence of the people you love most can be the catalyst for the most important conversations you'll ever have. But perhaps most importantly, we all learned that it's never too late to start over, to admit you were wrong, and to build something better than what came before. The day I thought would be defined by loneliness and disappointment instead became the day my family found their way back to each other. Sometimes the best gifts come in the most unexpected packages, even when that package is a pair of empty chairs and a phone call that changes everything.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Jennifer's expression darkened as she opened her file folder. It's a complex case involving a 12-year-old girl named Maria Santos. She's been in the system for about 18 months now, bouncing between foster homes because of severe behavioral issues stemming from trauma. The thing is, her trauma isn't just from typical abuse or neglect. She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. Maria's father worked at a manufacturing plant here in the Bay Area. 3 years ago, there was an industrial accident, a chemical leak that should have been contained by safety protocols that apparently weren't being followed properly. Maria's father and 14 other workers were hospitalized. 7 of them, including Maria's father, died from chemical poisoning. I felt my blood run cold. That's horrible. What happened to the family afterward? That's where it gets complicated, Jennifer continued. Maria's mother had a complete breakdown after her husband's death. She started drinking heavily, couldn't maintain employment, eventually became homeless with Maria. The state had to remove Maria from her care about 6 months after her father's death. And the company? Were there any legal consequences for the accident? Jennifer's laugh was bitter. Oh, there were lawsuits, lots of them. But the company had excellent lawyers and deep pockets. They managed to settle most of the cases for relatively small amounts, and they had enough political connections to avoid any serious criminal charges. The families got just enough money to bury their dead and try to move on, but nowhere near enough to actually rebuild their lives. She handed me a photograph of a young girl with dark hair and sad eyes. Maria Santos looked older than 12, with the kind of premature maturity that comes from experiencing too much loss too young. The thing is, Jennifer continued, Maria has been asking questions about her father's death that go beyond typical childhood grief. She's obsessed with understanding exactly what happened at that plant, what safety measures should have been in place, why the people responsible weren't held accountable. It's actually interfering with her ability to form attachments with potential adoptive families. I studied Maria's picture, seeing something of myself in her expression, the determination beneath the sadness, the sense that justice hadn't been served. "What's the name of the company where her father worked?" I asked, though something in my gut already knew the answer. "Chen Industries," Jennifer replied. "They manufacture industrial components and chemicals. Big operation, very well connected politically. The owner is some wealthy guy who's donated millions to local politicians over the years." The room started spinning around me. Chen Industries, my father's company, the empire he had built, the legacy he had wanted me to inherit, the business that employed 3,000 people and made him one of the most respected manufacturers on the West Coast, the business that had killed Maria Santos's father. "Are you okay?" Jennifer asked, noticing that I had gone pale. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I set down Maria's photograph with shaking hands. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. This industrial accident, this chemical leak at Chen Industries, how much do you know about the details?" Jennifer looked surprised by the intensity of my question. "More than I probably should, honestly. Maria's case has become personal for me. I've done a lot of research trying to understand her trauma, and I've read through all the court documents, safety reports, everything I could get my hands on." "And what did you find?" "I found a pattern," Jennifer said grimly. Chen Industries had been cited for safety violations multiple times in the years leading up to the accident. Minor things, mostly. Inadequate ventilation systems, outdated chemical storage protocols, insufficient training for workers handling hazardous materials. Nothing that individually would cause a disaster, but collectively they created a perfect storm of negligence. She pulled out a thick folder and spread several documents across my desk. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a safety inspection report dated 6 months before the accident. The inspector specifically recommended upgrading the chemical containment systems and improving worker safety training. The company was given 90 days to implement these changes. And did they? Some of them. They upgraded the ventilation system, but they never properly trained the workers on the new chemical handling procedures. They installed new containment equipment, but they didn't maintain it properly. It's like they did the minimum necessary to avoid fines, but not enough to actually prevent an accident. I stared at the documents, recognizing my father's signature on several of the compliance forms. David Chen, CEO, certifying that safety improvements had been implemented when clearly they hadn't been implemented thoroughly enough. "The most damning thing," Jennifer continued, "is this internal memo that came out during the lawsuit." She handed me a photocopy of a document that made my stomach drop. It was a memo from my father to his plant managers, dated 2 months before the accident, discussing budget cuts and the need to streamline safety protocols to improve efficiency and reduce unnecessary expenditures. In my father's own handwriting were the words that would haunt me forever. We need to find ways to meet basic safety requirements without over-investing in redundant systems. Our competitors are operating more efficiently, and we need to match their cost structure. 15 people lost their lives because the company prioritized profits over safety, and Maria Santos lost everything because of those choices. I sat in stunned silence, trying to reconcile the father who had cried in the coffee shop 3 days ago, who had begged for my forgiveness and promised to be better, with the man whose signature was on documents that had contributed to a preventable tragedy. "Why are you showing me this?" I finally asked. "Because Maria needs help that goes beyond traditional therapy," Jennifer replied. "She needs someone who understands trauma, yes, but she also needs someone who understands systems, who can help her process not just her grief, but her anger at the injustice of what happened. Your research on trauma-informed care specifically addresses cases where institutional negligence has caused family disruption." She paused, studying her face carefully. "Also, I have to admit, I was hoping that someone with your credentials might be willing to advocate for Maria in ways that the system hasn't been able to. This case has been closed from a legal standpoint, but from a human services standpoint, this child is still suffering from decisions made in corporate boardrooms." I looked down at Maria's photograph again, and this time I saw not just a traumatized 12-year-old, but a victim of my family's business practices. A child whose life had been destroyed by the same company I had been expected to inherit and lead. "I'll take the case," I said quietly. "Really? That's wonderful." I should mention, though, that Maria can be challenging to work with. She's been through 4 different therapists, and she's built up significant walls against adults in authority positions. "I understand," I said, though I wasn't sure I understood anything anymore. After Jennifer left, I sat alone in my office, staring at the case files and trying to process what I had just learned. The company I had rejected, the legacy I had walked away from, the business empire my parents had built, it was founded on more than just hard work and determination. It was also built on cost-cutting decisions that had real consequences for real families. I thought about all those dinner party conversations where my parents had talked about their business success, about providing jobs for thousands of people, about contributing to the local economy. Had they known about accidents like this one? Had they known that their pursuit of efficiency and profit had come at the cost of worker safety? Or worse, had they known and convinced themselves that it was an acceptable cost of doing business? I picked up my phone to call my mother, then set it down again. What would I say? "Hi, Mom. Congratulations on our reconciliation. By the way, I just found out that Dad's company killed a 12-year-old's father and destroyed her family. How was your day?" Instead, I decided to do what I did best: research. Over the next several hours, I dove deep into everything I could find about Chen Industries' safety record. What I discovered made me physically ill. The accident that killed Maria's father wasn't an isolated incident. It was the worst accident, yes, but there had been others. Over the past decade, Chen Industries had been cited for safety violations at least 30 times across their various facilities. There had been 2 other chemical accidents, though thankfully none fatal. There had been multiple workplace injuries that could have been prevented with better safety protocols. Most disturbing of all, I found evidence that the pattern of prioritizing cost savings over safety had been consistent throughout my father's tenure as CEO. Internal documents that had come to light during various lawsuits showed a corporate culture that viewed safety expenditures as necessary evils to be minimized wherever possible. I found performance evaluations where plant managers were praised for creative cost-cutting measures and efficient resource allocation. I found budget meetings where safety improvements were consistently deferred in favor of equipment purchases that would improve productivity. And through it all, my father's signature, his approval, his of a company that had systematically chosen profits over people. By the time I left work that evening, I felt like I was carrying the weight of 15 families' worth of grief and anger. But I also felt something else. A clarity about my purpose that I had never experienced before. This was why I had been called to social work, not just to help individuals heal from trauma, but to address the systemic causes of that trauma. Not just to provide therapy to children like Maria, but to hold accountable the institutions and decision-makers whose choices created children like Maria in the first place. The next morning, I called Jennifer to arrange my first meeting with Maria Santos. We decided to meet at the group home where she was currently placed, a small residential facility that specialized in older children with behavioral challenges. Maria was waiting for me in the common room, sitting in a corner chair with a book clutched to her chest like armor. She looked up when I approached, and I was struck by how guarded her expression was. This was a child who had learned not to trust adults, especially adults who claimed they were there to help. "Hi, Maria," I said, settling into a chair across from her, but not too close. "I'm Isabella. Jennifer thought we might like to talk to each other." "Are you another therapist?" she asked, her voice flat with resignation. "I am, but I'm also something else. I'm someone who thinks that what happened to your dad was wrong, and that the people responsible should have faced real consequences." For the first time, Maria looked directly at me. "You know about the accident?" "I know about the accident, and I know about Chen Industries, and I know that your father and 14 other people died because the company didn't care enough about worker safety to do what they should have done." Maria set down her book and leaned forward slightly. "Nobody ever says that. All the other therapists want to talk about my feelings and my anger and how I need to let go and move on. But nobody ever says that what happened was actually wrong." "It was wrong," I said firmly. "It was preventable. It was the result of bad decisions made by people who prioritized money over lives, and you have every right to be angry about that." For the next hour, Maria and I talked about her father, about the accident, about the lawsuit that had resulted in what she called blood money, a settlement that was supposed to make up for her father's life, but couldn't even cover her mother's medical bills when her drinking led to liver problems. But we also talked about Maria's life before the accident. Her father's dream of saving enough money to open his own small business. Her mother's job as an elementary school teacher. The family trips they had planned but never got to take. Maria was more than just a traumatized child. She was a girl who had lost an entire future, not just a parent. "The thing that makes me maddest," Maria said toward the end of our session, "is that they're still doing the same things. Chen Industries, I mean. They paid some money to my family and the other families, but they didn't actually change anything important. They just figured out how to hide it better." "What do you mean?" I asked. "I've been following them online," Maria admitted. "I know it's probably not healthy or whatever, but I look up news about the company sometimes. Last year, there was another accident at their Oakland facility. Nobody died, but 12 people got hurt. And the news reports made it sound like it was just bad luck, like it couldn't have been prevented." She pulled out a folded newspaper clipping from her pocket. "But if you read the details, it sounds exactly like what happened to my dad. Safety equipment that wasn't maintained properly, workers who weren't trained on emergency procedures, management that was more worried about production deadlines than worker safety." I took the clipping and read through it, recognizing the same patterns Jennifer had shown me in Maria's case files. The same corporate language about isolated incidents and commitment to improvement. The same minimal legal consequences and quick settlements designed to make the story go away as fast as possible. "Maria," I said carefully, "what would justice look like to you? If you could wave a magic wand and make things right, what would that look like?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the group home's small backyard. "I want them to admit they were wrong," she finally said. "Not just pay money to make it go away, but actually admit that they made bad choices that killed people. I want them to change their company so it doesn't happen to other kids' families. And I want—" She trailed off, looking embarrassed. "What do you want?" I prompted gently. "I want to do something with my life that makes sure companies like Chen Industries can't get away with hurting people. I want to be a lawyer or a journalist or something that helps protect workers and their families." "Those are good goals," I said. "Important goals." "But I'm just a kid in foster care," Maria replied, her voice heavy with defeat. "Nobody listens to kids like me. Nobody cares what we think about justice or fairness or any of that stuff. Maria, can I tell you something? Some of the most important changes in the world have been made by people who started out feeling powerless. People who were told they were too young or too poor or too unimportant to make a difference. I paused, thinking about my own journey from privileged daughter to independent professional, about the strength I had discovered when I thought I had nothing left to lose. And sometimes, I continued, the people who have the most power to create change are the ones who understand personally what needs to be changed. As I drove home that evening, I found myself at a crossroads that I hadn't anticipated.
On one side was my new life, a promising career, a reconciled family relationship, and the opportunity to help children like Maria heal from their trauma and move forward with their lives. On the other side was something more complicated and potentially more dangerous, the possibility of using my unique position as both a trauma specialist and the daughter of Chen Industries' CEO to seek not just healing for Maria, but accountability for my father's company. The safe choice was obvious. Work with Maria on processing her grief and anger, help her develop healthy coping mechanisms, support her in aging out of the foster system, and pursuing her educational goals. Focus on the therapeutic relationship and leave the systemic issues to other people with other expertise. But as I pulled into my apartment parking lot, I realized that the safe choice was also the wrong choice. Maria didn't just need therapy, she needed an advocate. The families who had lost loved ones in Chen Industries accidents didn't just need compensation, they needed someone with the insider knowledge and professional credibility to hold the company accountable for its patterns of negligence. And I was uniquely positioned to be that advocate. That night, I called my mentor, Professor Williams, and told her everything about Maria's case, about my father's company, about the internal documents that showed a pattern of prioritizing profits over safety. Isabella, she said when I finished, this is exactly the kind of systemic advocacy work that your research has been building toward, but you need to understand the personal and professional risks you'd be taking on. What do you mean? I mean that if you decide to take on Chen Industries in any meaningful way, you're not just challenging a powerful corporation, you're challenging your own family. Your relationship with your parents, which you just rebuilt, could be destroyed all over again. Professor Williams was quiet for a moment before continuing. But I also have to tell you that if anyone has the knowledge, the skills, and the motivation to hold a company like this accountable, it's someone in your position. The question is whether you're prepared for what that kind of fight would cost you personally. I stayed awake most of that night, thinking about Maria's questions about justice, about my father's signature on safety documents, about the 15 families whose lives had been forever changed by corporate decisions that prioritized efficiency over human life. By morning, I had made my decision. I was going to help Maria Santos get the justice her father deserved, even if it meant going to war with my own family's legacy. The first step was building a case that went beyond individual therapy. I spent the next 2 weeks diving deeper into Chen Industries' history, documenting patterns of safety violations, tracking settlements and legal cases, identifying other families who had been impacted by the company's negligence. What I found was a systemic problem that went far beyond the accident that had killed Maria's father. Over the past 15 years, Chen Industries had been responsible for dozens of workplace injuries, multiple chemical accidents, and several cases of environmental contamination that had affected surrounding communities. But perhaps more importantly, I found evidence that my father and other company executives had been aware of these patterns and had consistently chosen to address them through legal settlements and public relations campaigns rather than meaningful operational changes. There were internal emails discussing the acceptable cost of safety violations. There were board meeting minutes where executives calculated that paying lawsuit settlements was more cost-effective than implementing comprehensive safety upgrades. There were performance evaluations that rewarded managers for keeping safety expenditures below budget targets, even when those budgets were inadequate to maintain truly safe working conditions. I also discovered something that changed everything I thought I knew about my parents' financial success. Buried in the company's financial records, which were public due to various lawsuit disclosures, I found evidence that Chen Industries had been systematically underreporting safety expenditures to investors while overreporting them to regulatory agencies. They were essentially cooking the books to make their safety record look better to regulators while making their profit margins look better to stockholders. This wasn't just negligence, it was fraud. Armed with this information, I made an appointment to meet with investigative journalist Isabella Martinez, who had written extensively about corporate accountability and worker safety issues. I had read her articles about other manufacturing companies, and I knew she had the expertise and the platform to help bring Chen Industries' practices to public attention. We met at a coffee shop in downtown San Francisco, and I brought copies of everything I had found. Rebecca listened intently as I explained the patterns of negligence, the cover-ups, the systematic prioritization of profits over worker safety. "This is incredibly damaging information," Rebecca said when I finished. "If even half of this can be independently verified, it would be one of the most significant corporate accountability stories I've worked on in years." She paused, studying my face carefully. "But I have to ask, why are you bringing this to me? What's your connection to all of this research?" I took a deep breath and told her the truth. David Chen is my father. Chen Industries is the family business I was supposed to inherit. Rebecca nearly dropped her coffee cup. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. I walked away from the company 4 years ago to pursue social work instead. My parents and I just reconciled a few weeks ago, but now I've discovered that the business they built is responsible for destroying families like Maria Santos's." "And you're willing to go public with allegations against your own father's company?" "I'm not willing to," I said quietly. "I have to. I became a social worker to help children who have been failed by the systems that are supposed to protect them. If I ignore what I know about Chen Industries, I'm failing Maria and every other child whose family has been destroyed by corporate negligence." Rebecca spent the next hour asking detailed questions about my documentation, my sources, and my motivations. By the end of our meeting, she was convinced that the story was not only newsworthy, but also potentially groundbreaking in its scope and implications. "I'll need time to verify your information independently," she said. "I can't publish a story this significant based solely on documents provided by a family member, even one who's clearly acting in good faith." "I understand," I replied, "but I want you to know that I'm prepared to go on the record with everything I found. I'm prepared to testify in court if necessary. I'm prepared to face whatever consequences come from challenging my family's business." "Are you prepared to lose your relationship with your parents all over again?" Rebecca asked gently, "because that's almost certainly what will happen if this story gains traction." I thought about my parents crying in the coffee shop, about their promises to be better, about the 4 years of estrangement we had just overcome. Then I thought about Maria Santos, sitting in a group home, carrying the weight of her father's preventable death and her family's destruction. "Some things are more important than family harmony," I said. 2 weeks later, Rebecca's investigation was published as a front-page series in the San Francisco Chronicle. The headlines were devastating. "Manufacturing Giant's Hidden Safety Record," "Profits Over People," "Inside Chen Industries' Culture of Negligence," and "The True Cost of Corporate Efficiency." The articles included everything I had provided, along with additional reporting that Rebecca had conducted independently. She had interviewed former Chen Industries employees who confirmed the pressure to cut safety costs. She had spoken with families of other accident victims who had been pressured into signing confidentiality agreements as part of their settlements. She had obtained additional internal documents through Freedom of Information requests and court records. Most damaging of all, she had uncovered evidence that Chen Industries had been lobbying state legislators to weaken workplace safety regulations, arguing that existing standards were, quote, "burdensome to business" and, quote, "unnecessarily restrictive." The day the first article was published, my phone started ringing at 6 in the morning. The first call was from my mother. "Isabella," she said, her voice shaking with emotion, "did you see today's newspaper?" "Yes, Mom, I saw it." "How is this possible? How did this reporter get access to internal company documents? How did she know about accidents from years ago that were settled confidentially?" I closed my eyes and prepared to destroy my relationship with my parents all over again. "She got the information from me, Mom." The silence on the other end of the phone seemed to last forever. "What do you mean, from you?" my mother finally asked. "I mean, I gave her the documents. I provided the information. I helped her investigate Dad's company because someone needed to hold Chen Industries accountable for the people who have died and been injured because of corporate negligence." The sound my mother made was somewhere between a sob and a gasp of horror. "Isabella, how could you do this to us?"
How could you destroy your father's life's work? How could you betray your own family like this? Mom, 15 people are dead because Dad's company prioritized profits over safety. Maria Santos has no family left because Dad's company didn't properly maintain their chemical containment systems. I didn't betray our family. I tried to prevent our family's business from betraying more innocent families. But we just got you back, my mother cried. We just reconciled. We were supposed to be a family again. We can still be a family, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. But we can't be a family that ignores what Chen Industries has done to other families. My father called an hour later. Unlike my mother, he was furious. Isabella, you have destroyed everything I spent my entire adult life building, he said, his voice cold with rage. Do you have any idea what this newspaper story is going to do to the company, to our employees, to our family's reputation? Dad, do you have any idea what your company's safety failures have done to families like the Santos family? Do you understand that people are dead because of decisions you made to cut costs instead of protect workers? Those were business decisions, made in consultation with safety experts and legal advisors, my father replied. We followed all applicable regulations and industry standards. You followed the minimum legal requirements while knowing they weren't sufficient to actually protect people, I shot back. Your own internal documents prove that you were aware of safety risks and chose not to address them because it would have hurt profit margins. I built a company that employs 3,000 people and contributes millions of dollars to the local economy, my father said. I've done more good for more families than you can possibly understand. You've also done irreparable harm to families whose voices don't matter as much because they're not wealthy and well-connected. The conversation ended with my father hanging up on me, but not before delivering an ultimatum that felt all too familiar. If you continue down this path, if you continue to attack this company and this family, you will no longer be welcome in our home. We cannot have a relationship with someone who is actively working to destroy everything we've built. And just like that, I was estranged from my parents again. But this time, it felt different. This time, I wasn't walking away from them because of what I wanted to do with my life. I was walking away because of what they had done with theirs. The media attention following Rebecca's articles was intense and overwhelming. Chen Industries' stock price dropped by 30% in the first week. Regulatory agencies announced new investigations into the company's safety practices. Families of accident victims who had signed confidentiality agreements began speaking publicly for the first time, emboldened by the evidence that their cases weren't isolated incidents. Most significantly, a group of workers at Chen Industries' main facility organized a strike, demanding improved safety conditions and the resignation of key executives who had been responsible for the cost-cutting policies that had led to accidents and injuries. I found myself at the center of a media storm I hadn't anticipated. Reporters wanted to interview me about my decision to expose my own family's business. Worker advocates wanted me to speak at rallies and press conferences. Legal experts wanted my opinion on corporate accountability and the adequacy of existing workplace safety regulations. Through it all, Maria Santos remained my priority. Our therapy sessions had evolved from traditional trauma processing to something more like collaborative advocacy work. Maria was following every development in the Chen Industries story, and she was beginning to see herself not just as a victim, but as someone whose voice and experience mattered in the broader conversation about corporate responsibility. "Do you think this will actually change anything?" she asked during one of our sessions, holding a newspaper article about the federal investigation that had been launched into Chen Industries. "I think it's already changing things," I replied.
Your story is being heard by people who have the power to prevent other families from going through what you went through. But what about your family? Are you okay with losing them again? It was a question I had been asking myself every day since the newspaper articles were published. Maria, sometimes doing the right thing costs us something precious, but not doing the right thing costs other people something precious too. I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent about what I knew while other families suffered preventable tragedies. So you chose other people's families over your own family? I chose accountability over comfort, I said. I chose speaking truth over keeping peace. Maria nodded slowly. That's what my dad would have wanted me to do. 6 months later, the consequences of my decision were still unfolding. A federal grand jury had indicted 3 Chen Industries executives, including my father, on charges of corporate manslaughter and fraudulent reporting to regulatory agencies. The company had been forced to implement comprehensive safety reforms and submit to ongoing federal oversight. Several families, including Maria's, had received additional compensation as part of a settlement that acknowledged the company's systemic negligence. Most importantly, Maria Santos had found her voice as an advocate for workplace safety and corporate accountability. She had testified before a congressional committee about the impact of industrial accidents on families and children. She had spoken at worker safety rallies and corporate accountability conferences. She was planning to study law when she aged out of foster care, with several universities already expressing interest in offering her full scholarships. As for my parents, we hadn't spoken since the day the federal indictments were announced. I had tried reaching out several times, hoping that we might find a way to separate our personal relationship from the professional consequences of my decisions. But they remained convinced that I had betrayed not just their business, but their love and trust. I missed them terribly, but I didn't regret what I had done. Sometimes justice requires sacrifice. Sometimes protecting the vulnerable requires standing up to the powerful, even when the powerful are the people who raised you and loved you and wanted the best for you, according to their understanding of what best meant. I had learned that family loyalty is complicated when family interests conflict with moral obligation. I had learned that love isn't always enough to bridge fundamental disagreements about right and wrong. But I had also learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people is refuse to enable their harmful choices, even when that refusal costs you their presence in your life. Maria Santos was thriving now, building a future dedicated to preventing other children from experiencing the loss and injustice she had endured. The workers at Chen Industries had safer working conditions because I had chosen to speak out rather than remain silent. And I had found a purpose in my work that went beyond individual therapy to systemic change, using my unique position and knowledge to advocate for families who didn't have voices powerful enough to be heard on their own. It wasn't the life I had planned, and it wasn't the family relationship I had hoped to rebuild. But it was a life I could live with, and that was more than I had been able to say before I met Maria Santos and learned what my family's business had cost hers. The empty seats at my graduation taught me about the importance of family presence and support. The full courtroom at my father's arraignment taught me about the importance of moral courage and systemic accountability. Both lessons were painful, but both were necessary for becoming the person I was meant to be. 2 years had passed since the federal indictments were announced, and the world looked dramatically different than it had on that graduation day when I stood alone in the auditorium, searching for faces that weren't there. The empty seats that had once symbolized abandonment had somehow led me to the most fulfilling chapter of my life, though the journey had cost me more than I could have imagined when it began. My father's trial had concluded 6 months ago, with a conviction on multiple counts of corporate manslaughter and regulatory fraud. He received a sentence of 8 years in federal prison, though he would likely serve only 5 with good behavior. The other Chen Industries executives received similar sentences, and the company itself faced the largest workplace safety fine in California history. More importantly, the case had sparked nationwide reforms in industrial safety regulations and corporate accountability measures. Maria Santos had become the public face of these changes, testifying before Congress and speaking at universities about the human cost of corporate negligence. At 15 now, she possessed a poise and purpose that continued to amaze everyone who met her. The foster care system had finally found her a permanent placement with the Rodriguez family, experienced foster parents who specialized in older children with complex needs. Maria had thrived in their care, maintaining her academic excellence while developing the kind of stable family relationships that had been stolen from her when her father died. But perhaps the most unexpected development was the phone call I received on a rainy Thursday morning in October, exactly 2 years and 3 months after my parents had cut me out of their lives for the second time.
Isabella, it's me. My mother's voice was different than I remembered. Older, more fragile, stripped of the confident authority that had characterized her throughout my childhood. I nearly dropped my coffee mug in shock. "Mom?" I managed to whisper. "I know I don't have the right to call you after everything that's happened. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need to see you. There are things I need to say, and I'm running out of time to say them." The phrase "running out of time" sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the October weather. "Are you sick?" I asked. "I have pancreatic cancer," she replied simply. "Stage 4. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months, possibly less." The world seemed to tilt sideways around me. Whatever anger and hurt I had carried about our estrangement suddenly felt insignificant compared to the reality that my mother was dying. "Mom, I'm so sorry. When did you find out?" 3 months ago. I've been getting treatment, but it's not working very well. The thing is, Isabella, I've had a lot of time to think about everything that's happened. About the choices your father and I made, about the way we treated you, about what you tried to tell us about the company. She paused, and I could hear her struggling not to cry. "You were right. About everything. The safety violations, the cover-ups, the way we prioritized profits over people's lives. I've spent the last 2 years reading every article, every court document, every piece of evidence that came out during the trial. You were right, and we were wrong, and I need to tell you that before I die. Mom, you don't need to apologize for anything right now. You need to focus on treatment and taking care of yourself. Isabella, please, this is important. Will you come see me? Will you let me try to explain how we got so lost that we couldn't see what our own business was doing to innocent families?" That afternoon, I drove to my childhood home for the first time in over 2 years. The house looked smaller than I remembered, less imposing somehow. The manicured gardens that had always been my mother's pride were overgrown and neglected, reflecting the chaos that had consumed our family's life since the scandal broke. My mother answered the door herself, and the physical change in her was shocking. She had lost at least 30 pounds, and the vibrant, commanding presence I remembered from my youth had been replaced by someone who looked frail and exhausted. But her eyes were clearer than I had seen them in years, as if the illness had stripped away the defenses and justifications that had clouded her perspective for so long. "Thank you for coming," she said, embracing me carefully. "I wasn't sure you would." We sat in the living room where I had spent countless hours as a child, surrounded by family photographs that now felt like artifacts from a different lifetime. My mother had prepared tea, her hands shaking slightly as she poured it into the same china cups she had used for important conversations throughout my childhood. "I need to start by telling you that I'm proud of you," she said without preamble. "I know I never said it when it mattered, but I'm proud of the woman you became and the choices you made. You showed more courage and integrity than your father and I ever did. Mom, you built a successful business from nothing. You and Dad achieved incredible things. We achieved profitable things," she corrected, "but we lost sight of what success actually means. We became so focused on building wealth and status that we forgot about building character. We forgot that a business built on other people's suffering isn't actually successful at all." She pulled out a thick folder from the side table beside her chair. "I've been working on something since my diagnosis. It's a comprehensive audit of every Chen Industries safety incident over the past 20 years, along with documentation of every decision your father and I made that contributed to those incidents." I opened the folder and found hundreds of pages of meticulously organized documents, emails, meeting notes, and financial records. It was more thorough than anything that had come out during the federal investigation. "Why did you put this together?" I asked. Because I want to make sure that the full truth is documented, not just the parts that came out in court. I want the families who were affected to have access to everything, so they understand exactly how and why their loved ones were put in danger. She paused, taking a sip of her tea with trembling hands. But mostly, I put it together because I wanted you to understand that we knew. We knew the risks we were taking with other people's lives, and we chose to take them anyway because it was profitable. I need you to know that our actions weren't the result of ignorance or oversight. They were the result of moral cowardice. Mom, you don't have to torture yourself with this. What's done is done. What's done is done, but what comes next isn't determined yet. Isabella, I've spent the last 6 months liquidating every asset your father and I accumulated through Chen Industries. The house, the investment accounts, the vacation properties, everything. I stared at her in confusion. What are you planning to do with the money? I'm giving it away, all of it, to the families who were affected by our company's negligence, to workplace safety organizations, to scholarship funds for children who lost parents in industrial accidents. Every penny we made from that business needs to go back to repairing the damage it caused. The magnitude of what she was describing was staggering. My parents had accumulated tens of millions of dollars in wealth over the decades. Giving it all away would be an unprecedented act of restitution for corporate wrongdoing. Does Dad know about this? I asked. My mother's expression darkened slightly. Your father and I have very different perspectives on what we owe to the families we hurt. He believes that serving his prison sentence is sufficient accountability. I believe that we need to do everything in our power to repair the damage we caused, even if it means giving up every material thing we gained from causing that damage. She reached across the table and took my hands in hers. Isabella, I know I have no right to ask you for anything after the way we treated you, but I need your help with this. I don't trust lawyers or financial advisors to distribute this money in a way that actually helps the people who need it most. I need someone who understands trauma and family systems and social justice. I need someone who cares more about doing the right thing than about protecting family reputation. You want me to help you give away your entire fortune?
I want you to help me give away money that was never really ours to begin with. We built our wealth on the backs of workers whose safety we compromised. Every dollar we made came at the cost of other families' security and well-being. This isn't charity, it's restitution. Over the next several hours, my mother outlined her plan in detail. She had already established contact with most of the affected families, including Maria Santos and her mother, who had recently completed a successful rehabilitation program and was working as a teacher again. She had identified reputable organizations working on workplace safety and corporate accountability. She had researched scholarship programs and support services for children in situations similar to Maria's. Most impressively, she had developed a framework for ongoing support rather than one-time payments. Families would receive assistance with medical bills, educational expenses, housing stability, and mental health services for as long as they needed it. The goal wasn't to compensate them for their losses, which was impossible, but to ensure that those losses didn't prevent them from building stable futures. "This is incredible, Mom," I said, reviewing her detailed plans. "But it's also enormous. Are you sure you're up for managing something this complex while you're dealing with cancer treatment?" "I'm not going to be managing it," she replied quietly. "I'm hoping you will." The request hung in the air between us like a bridge across 2 years of estrangement and hurt. "You want me to oversee the distribution of your entire estate?" "I want you to make sure that our family's wealth is used to heal the damage our family's business caused. I want you to work with people like Maria Santos to determine what would actually be helpful, rather than what looks good in a press release. I want our money to serve justice instead of serving our own interests." I thought about Maria, now thriving in her new family, but still carrying the scars of her father's preventable death. I thought about the other families I had met through my advocacy work, families who continued to struggle with medical bills and trauma symptoms and economic instability because of industrial accidents that could have been prevented. I thought about the conversation I'd had with Maria just the week before, where she had talked about her plans to study law so she could advocate for workers' rights and corporate accountability.
How much easier would those plans be if she didn't have to worry about paying for college, or supporting her mother's ongoing recovery, or managing the financial stress that came with being a survivor of corporate negligence? I'll do it, I said, but I have conditions. What conditions? First, this has to be completely transparent. No secret distributions, no anonymous donations, no attempts to control how the money is used once it's given. The families we're helping need to maintain their dignity and autonomy. My mother nodded. Agreed. Second, we involve the recipients in determining how the money is distributed. This isn't about us deciding what's best for them, it's about us providing resources for them to decide what's best for themselves. Agreed. Third, this doesn't erase what Chen Industries did to these families. This is restitution, not absolution. We don't get to feel better about ourselves just because we're giving money away. Agreed, my mother said, tears flowing freely now. Isabella, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect our relationship to go back to what it was before all of this happened. I just want to spend whatever time I have left trying to repair some of the damage we caused. The work began immediately. I took a leave of absence from Pacific Coast Children's Services to focus full-time on what we called the Chen Family Accountability Fund. Maria Santos became my closest collaborator, helping to identify families who needed support and working with me to develop distribution criteria that actually addressed people's real needs rather than our assumptions about what they needed. The response from the affected families was mixed but largely positive. Some people were suspicious of our motives, wondering if this was an attempt to buy their silence or improve the Chen family's public image. Others were grateful for support that would genuinely improve their lives and their children's futures. Maria's mother, Elena Santos, was among the most gracious recipients. She used her portion of the fund to complete a master's degree in education and establish a scholarship program for children who had lost parents in workplace accidents. Maria herself put her money into a trust fund for college and law school, with the remainder designated for a nonprofit she planned to start, focused on corporate accountability and worker safety. My mother's health declined rapidly over the 6 months following our reunion, but she remained actively involved in the accountability fund until just weeks before her death. She personally met with dozens of the families we were supporting, listening to their stories and apologizing for the role Chen Industries had played in their suffering. Those conversations were often difficult and emotionally exhausting, but they seemed to provide my mother with something she hadn't found anywhere else, a sense that her final months were meaningful, that she was using whatever time she had left to serve justice rather than self-interest. She died on a spring morning exactly 1 year after our reunion, surrounded by family members who had learned to see wealth and success in entirely new terms. Her funeral was attended not only by business associates and society friends, but by many of the families she had worked to support through the Accountability Fund. Elena Santos spoke at the service, talking about forgiveness and redemption and the possibility of healing even the deepest wounds through authentic accountability. Maria read a letter she had written to my mother, thanking her for showing that it was never too late to choose justice over comfort, truth over reputation, moral courage over social approval. The Chen Family Accountability Fund continues to operate today, managed by a board that includes Maria Santos, several other family members of Chen Industries accident victims, workplace safety experts, and community organizers. We have distributed over $40 million to date, supporting not just individual families, but also systemic reforms that make similar accidents less likely in the future. My father was released from prison last month after serving 4 years of his sentence. We have had several conversations about his potential involvement in the Accountability Fund, but he remains convinced that his legal punishment was sufficient accountability. He has expressed interest in rebuilding our personal relationship, but he has not yet expressed genuine understanding of why I made the choices I made or why my mother dedicated her final year to make amends. Our relationship remains complicated and uncertain, but I have learned that love doesn't require agreement, and family doesn't require moral unanimity. I can love my father while disagreeing fundamentally with his understanding of responsibility and accountability. I can hope for his eventual moral growth while accepting that it may never come. Maria Santos is now 18 and beginning her freshman year at Stanford University, where she is studying political science and economics with plans to attend law school. She has become a nationally recognized advocate for corporate accountability and workers' rights, speaking at conferences and universities across the country about the human cost of regulatory capture and corporate impunity. More importantly, she has become like a younger sister to me, someone whose wisdom and resilience continue to inspire my work and my life. The empty seats at my graduation, which once symbolized abandonment and disappointment, ultimately led me to the most important relationship and the most meaningful work of my life. Sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in our deepest losses. Sometimes the path to purpose runs directly through heartbreak and moral crisis. Sometimes the family we choose matters more than the family we inherit, even when we love them both. I think about that graduation day often, about the girl who stood alone in the auditorium searching for approval from parents who didn't understand her choices. She couldn't have imagined that her loneliness would lead her to Maria Santos, or that her parents' absence would teach her about the kinds of presence that actually matter. She couldn't have known that her decision to pursue social work instead of business would position her to hold her own family's business accountable for its harm to other families. She couldn't have predicted that her estrangement from her parents would ultimately create the space for a more authentic relationship, built on truth rather than expectations. But mostly, she couldn't have understood that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people is refuse to enable their harmful choices, even when that refusal costs you their presence in your life. The empty seats taught me that love without accountability isn't really love at all. The full courtroom at my father's trial taught me that justice without compassion isn't really justice. And the work I do now, supporting families affected by corporate negligence while advocating for systemic change, has taught me that healing is possible, even from the deepest wounds, but only when we're willing to face the truth about how those wounds were created. Maria Santos lost her father to preventable corporate negligence, but she found her voice and her purpose in holding accountable the systems that failed to protect him. I lost the approval and support of my parents, but I found the courage and clarity to build a life based on my own values rather than their expectations. We both learned that sometimes the most important seat at your graduation is the one you save for yourself, the one that represents your own pride in what you've accomplished and your own commitment to the path you've chosen, regardless of who else shows up to witness it. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.